So when we do these lessons and these webinars, I want to remind you that I am both walking you through the steps of the lesson as though you are a student, and I am also talking to you as a teacher and how you can facilitate these lessons in your own classroom or with your own children if you are a parent. So we are going to be wearing a few different hats and switching gears a little bit throughout the webinar. So that way you have both the teaching tips, the behind the scenes, as well as the actual lesson and how to make the projects. So with lesson 3, I have opened the lesson plan, which is a PDF, as well as the slides. And we'll move to the slides in a moment. I do like to begin each webinar with an overview of our standards and our objectives, as well as an overview of what this lesson entails. So again, we're still in the beginner level of difficulty with this lesson. It's still an early lesson in the curriculum, and we're looking at a 45-minute duration for this lesson, and all of the lessons are going to be that same duration. So with this lesson, students are going to begin to understand, identify, and use events blocks and looks blocks. And we have a limited exposure to some of those in our last lesson, but we're going to really get to see the different blocks that are in the library and continue to use them. We're going to distinguish between 2 different events in block: when the green flag is clicked, which we've used previously, as well as when a key is pressed on the keyboard. We're going to learn about keyboard input and how keyboard input from a user can trigger events. And we're going to change the appearance of sprites using look blocks. What's also really neat about this lesson is we do look at positive and negative numbers, and we look at how positive and negative numbers can be used to increase and decrease different settings or different transformations in MBlock. And we're also going to look at the importance of resetting values in MBlock projects, and we'll see that very clearly as we move along. What's really neat about a program in MBlock is an event-driven programming language, which means that as a block-based programming language, there needs to be an event that triggers a sequence of actions to happen. And we talked about sequences on Tuesday, but our programs are triggered by some sort of event. The event that we've used previously is when the green flag is clicked. And we're going to learn another event in this lesson that is going to trigger a sequence of actions. And then we're going to learn how we can use different events to control a sprite's appearance. We're going to combine the events and looks blocks in this lesson. Again, we'll look at those positive and negative values, and we'll also clear and reset. So I'm going to, at this time, as we go through the lesson in the lesson plan, we have our connection to the CSTA and ISTE national standards, which we are continuing to develop as we go through this curriculum. We're going to jump into the warm-up, and the warm-up has corresponding slides in the PowerPoint. So I'm going to switch over to the PowerPoint for this part of the lesson, and we will revisit the lesson plan when we will come back to the lesson plan when we have something that we need to look at that's just in the lesson plan as a teacher tool. So this is our talented transformation lesson. And to review a little bit from last week, our last lesson, which was Tuesday, we created our panda inside of a space background. So we learned how to put a background into our project for the first time. And then we used the say blocks. We used the say blocks to have Panda say a greeting. Introduce Panda. Panda made an introduction to all the new friends that Panda met while on Earth. Okay. And to do that, we examined and distinguished between 2 different looks blocks. These were our first looks blocks that we used. We had say hello for 2 seconds and say hello. Those are the 2 blocks we looked at, and we distinguished the difference between the 2. As a reminder, we learned that say hello for 2 seconds keeps the speech bubble on the screen for only 2 seconds, and then it disappears. But the say hello without any duration will stay on the screen indefinitely until something else is said, until that sprite says something different. And we can see that description here on the slides, where it is continuously, that the say hello is continuously present when there's no seconds indicated. So today, before we begin working, the lesson plan has students look at some different, a pre-made example program. But I want to set our stage for a moment. So with our last program, we introduced Panda, and Panda met many new friends. Now these friends are going to celebrate Panda's arrival with a welcome to Earth party. And to get to know Panda better, they've asked Panda to showcase a unique talent that Panda has. Now Panda can change size, change color, become transparent, change brightness, and can even multiply. So Panda decides that these transformations are going to be what Panda showcases at the upcoming party. So in order for us as the programmer to learn about the transformations available in makeblock, we're going to have your students open up this program called Sprite Transformations. And this Sprite transformation is in your folder that you downloaded. It is a program that is in your folder. Now, when you're in makeblock, especially if you're using the web app in makeblock, you can go to the File menu, Open from my computer. File, Open from my computer. And when you do that, you can navigate to the file that was in your downloads. I was just able to double click on it because I have makeblock installed on my computer. But we're going to open this file called Lesson 3 Sprite Transformations. It was an example program that was provided in the downloads for this lesson. And if you don't have that downloaded, you can definitely watch and follow along on my screen. But I would encourage you when you're doing this lesson in a classroom is to have each individual student open this so that they can play at their own pace and their own speed and make their own observations, because the goal of this example program is for students to make observations about the different transformations without you teaching them. So that's what we're going to do right now. I'm not going to teach to you all the different transformations available. I want you to open this program and look at the code and notice that it says when a number key is pressed. These correspond to keys on your keyboard. So the numbers 1 through 8 are the keys you're going to use on your keyboard, and I want you to press the keys on your keyboard and observe what happens in the stage. So I'm going to press 1 and I'm going to watch what happens. And you can be doing this on your own screen if you'd like, or you can continue to watch. I'll press 2. Okay. Now 3. And we can be observing, I just pressed 4. We can be observing what is happening to Panda when we press these keys on the keyboard. 5. 6. 7. 8. So we should have seen some different things happening to Panda. We've observed what the code does when we run the code. And so when you do this with your students or with your learners in your classroom or at your house if you're a parent, your goal here is for students or your learners to see what they liked and what they didn't like or what was really cool, because we want them to choose 3 transformations at this point. So I really liked the mosaic. When it said mosaic, which was number 5, it's like Panda is like multiplying, which is really cool. I like that one. I like number 7, ghost. So you can take a moment and throw in the chat box which ones you liked as you were observing the different effects that you saw. So take a moment to play with the effects and to put in the chat box which effects you enjoyed or you like that you thought were pretty cool. So that's number 3, which is the whirl effect. And you'll see that Panda is programmed to say the effect that is being run. So we can I can press 6 on the keyboard and it will tell me, Panda says that it's brightness.
Hey, Rosemary.
Yes.
Okay, I'm seeing black boxes on your screen. Are you seeing that?
On the right side?
Okay. Yep, those on the right-hand side.
Those, okay, sorry. Is that better?
There's one more. Or is that like the chat box that you had open?
It was the chat box, but it's now gone. Is there still a black box on the right side?
Nope, they're gone. They're gone now.
Sorry,
okay.
I had the chat
I guess
box
we
open.
can't overlay those. Yeah.
Nope, I can't. Thank you. Good to know.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And I'm recognizing that only the attendees who have been chatted with individually have access to the chat box, it looks like. On the Q&A, there's some some attendees saying they don't have access to the chat.
Okay.
So we will navigate those settings for the chat box. Hopefully we can get that activated today. But either way, I hope you identified 3 transformations that you liked that Panda was able to perform. And so what I would also encourage you to do is, even though your learners and you have not ever seen this code on the right, and it may look a little complex in comparison to what we've done previously, I would encourage you to take a look at it so that you can just see what code is running when you press a key on the keyboard. So for example, I'm going to go up to the top. And that's something we haven't necessarily learned yet. So I have a lot of code over here in my script area. If you click on an empty part of your script area, you can click and drag your script area, view the code that is being hidden. So that's a good tip there. And so when I press the 1 key, Panda says color, it repeats 10 times, change the color effect by 25, wait half a second, and then clear the effects after it's repeated 10 times. We are going to learn all of this today, which is very, very, very exciting. So this program was just to see the effects in action so you kind of have an idea of what Panda is capable of. Now we're going to be able to learn the programming blocks that we need to be able to have Panda come up with his showcase for the Welcome to Earth party. So I'm going to head back to the PowerPoint slides. And this is where we need to learn a few more blocks. So previously we used the when green flag is clicked events block. This events block it's the start signal for any subsequent actions that happen. So any blocks that were attached to that block would run when that event was triggered. So what we're going to learn today is we're going to start using when the blank or space key is pressed, or when the up arrow key is pressed, or when the 1 key is pressed. We're going to learn to use keyboard input from the user to be able to trigger actions. So here are the 2 blocks that we're going to start with. We're going to start with the when the space key is pressed block, and we're going to see that we can choose a lot of different keys on the keyboard. We're going to find that in the events block area. And we're going to also begin by changing the size of our sprite, and that is under the looks category as well in the block area. And we'll see the distinction of positive and negative numbers. So the other blocks that we're going to look at are the changing effect and by a value. And so we can change the color effect, the fisheye effect, the whirl effect, pixelate effect, mosaic effect, brightness effect, and the ghost effect. And again, we'll examine how positive and negative values work in those in that block. And then we're going to learn to clear any graphic effects that we have set. So these are the blocks we're going to use as we begin to program. So at this time, it's a great time to go ahead and open MBlock. If you don't already have it open, if you were not able to open that example program, go ahead and get MBlock open. And remember, there are steps in the PowerPoint. So if you are using this presentation on a projector in your classroom, or you can print out the slides and give the slides to your learner if you're doing this at home. So there are steps in the slides. I'm going to go back to MBlock and I'm going to teach the steps without referring back to the PowerPoint like we've done in the previous webinars. So we're in MBlock. That's where we're going to start. So let's head to MBlock. Let me check the chat box real quick. Make sure that nobody said anything to me. Okay. So we're in MBlock and we're going to start by making a new project. So File, New in MBlock. If it asks you to save, that's your choice. I did not make any changes to that file, so I do not need to save it. And we're going to begin by locating our when the key is pressed events. Now remember, that is a yellow block and it is in the events category of our library, but there's one step I haven't done yet, and we have done this every other lesson. We need to go to the Sprites tab to make sure that we are on Panda, to make sure that we are programming on the correct sprite. We will actually in future lessons move into having multiple sprites in a program where it's not just one. And so it's very important that we get familiar with navigating to the Sprites tab and making sure we are on the correct sprite. So I'm going to come down to Events, and I will see that when the space key is pressed, it's the second option in the block area in my library. I'm going to again click and drag that over. And I'm going to click on this little drop down. This isn't something we've done a lot with yet, but when you pull a block over and there is a little down arrow, I'm going to zoom in a little bit on that to help you out. There is a little pointing arrow down. That means there's a drop down list of options for this block. And we're going to be using that drop down list quite a bit in this lesson. So we're going to find, for this first example, we're going to use the up arrow. So when the up arrow key is pressed on your keyboard, and that's referring to the arrow keys that you'll find on your keyboard. And then we're going to go to the looks section, and we're going to change the size. We're going to change the size. We're going to change the size by 10. And we will now test this. I said this on Tuesday's lesson, but it's really helpful to test your program as you are programming it. And so we have a small portion of our program done. It's when the up arrow key is pressed, change the size by 10. So now I can press my up arrow key and test my program to see if it works. So I have a small problem. I don't have a way to make it smaller. So now my panda's just really, really big. So this is where we continue with the steps in the lesson, and it talks to us about going ahead and making the size decrease when the down arrow key is pressed. The down arrow key is pressed. So I'm going to go over to the events block, bring my when the space key is pressed. I'm going to select down arrow. And I don't see an option that says decrease size. This is where those positive and negative numbers come into play. Negative, a negative number is subtracting from the size. So we are going to go down or decrease by 10 when we put negative 10 into that box. And we can test that using the down arrow key on our keyboard to see if that is working in our stage. So now I can use the up arrow to increase and the down arrow to decrease. That is the importance of positive and negative values when working in MBlock. When we want to lower or decrease a value, we use a negative number. And when we want to increase a value, we use a positive number. And even if you're working with younger age children who aren't familiar with positive and negative numbers, you can just tell them that they can put that minus sign or just that hyphen in front of it and it'll make it go down. Most children are very much ready to understand that even if they don't have they haven't yet fully learned positive and negative numbers. So we're going to continue with our Panda transformations just so we can practice what this programming looks like. And we're going to use the left and right arrows to change the mosaic effect. The left and right arrows to change the mosaic effect. So again, we're going to bring our when the space key is pressed, and I'm going to change it to when the left arrow key is pressed. And this is a new block in our looks category of our block area. And the looks category of the blocks area, if we scroll down a little bit, you should see a change color effect by 25. Change color effect by 25. And again, when we see those drop down arrows, that means that there are choices. There are choices there. So the choices available for effects in MBlock to change the appearance of a sprite are here on the screen, but they're color, fisheye, whirl, pixelate, mosaic, brightness, and ghost. And the reason why we had that sprite transformation sample program at the beginning was so that students came into this lesson when you were teaching them already knowing what those look like, because they're going to want to play with those and explore them. So let them play and explore in the warm-up portion of the lesson, so that way when you're building this program and continuing to work together as a class, if you're instructing this as guided practice, they won't be tempted to sit here and play with all of them now because they now know what they do and they've seen them before. So we're going to choose the mosaic effect, and we're going to test that. We're going to hit the left arrow to run or execute that program. Pretty cool. But again, I have that same problem. I don't have the ability to decrease that effect. So I'm going to show you a shortcut, and we actually teach this in a future lesson, but I think it's really easy to show on this lesson. If you right-click on the when the left arrow key is pressed, we can duplicate that block of code, that program, and we can change it to the right arrow and negative 25. So as an instructor or a teacher or a parent, that can be a very helpful thing for you to know to be able to more efficiently help as you're building programs. So again, you just right-click on a block of code, and then you hit duplicate, and it attaches to your mouse, and then you click to let it go. We learned on Tuesday in lesson 2 that you can delete blocks of code by clicking and dragging them back to your library and letting go. So I should be able to press my right arrow, and I should be able to decrease that effect. So at this point, maybe I've pressed the up arrow a bunch of times and the left arrow, and I want to be able to reset with just one button on the keyboard. I want to be able to clear every change that I've made. I want to be able to clear all of the changes that I've made. So we're going to use the space key for this. When you're programming an makeblock, the space key is a really great key to just reset or start over. It's a really easy one for people to tap and find. So we're going to do that. When the space key is pressed, the third block that we're going to get from the looks category, the looks block area, is towards the bottom of the looks, and you can scroll down in this looks category, is the clear graphic effects. Clear graphic effects. When I press the space key, it's going to clear any graphic effects that I have applied. And some of you may be identifying a problem. I see a problem. When I press the space key, something did not reset. We're going to talk about that because the lesson has students think about that critically on their own. So I'm going to go back to the lesson to show you where we're at. Oops. In the lesson. Note for the instructor, the lesson has a summary of all of the blocks that should be on our Panda. Ours looks that way. Those are the programs we added. And we ran the program using the arrow and space keys to observe the transformations. And this is the talking point with your students. Here's where you stop and let them think critically about what they need to do or what they could do to fix maybe a problem that they saw. So when we're working in programming, we don't always want to give all of the answers to students. We sometimes want them to identify their own problems and try to solve them on their own. So we start by asking them the difference between the green flagged and the space key block, when the space key is pressed block. But this second question here, what block could be added to the program that we just wrote when the space key is pressed, clear graphic effects? What block could we add to reset the size of the sprite when the space key is pressed? What block could be added? Okay, well, size is a looks block, so I'm going to go to the looks category, and I'm going to give you a moment, and if you have access to the chat, you can put it in the chat. If you have access to the Q&A panel, you can throw it in there. But what block do you think we could use to reset the size of our Panda when the space key is set, when the space key is pressed? So what block could we add I'm not sure if anybody's throwing anything in the Q&A. I'm kind of relying on Patrick and Christy for that. But what block could we add to when the space key is pressed, clear graphic effects, to also reset our size? Okay, well, hopefully some of you have figured that out. I'm seeing in the Q&A, some of you are saying set the size to 100%. Exactly. Set size to 100%. 100% is the standard size, the default size of our sprite. So now when I press the space key, the size resets. So I'm going to get really big, press the space key, and it resets. I can get big and I can add my mosaic effect, and when I hit the space key, both the size and the graphic effects now both reset. And the goal for that would be to have your students start exploring the block library. With this curriculum, we do not have time to teach every single block that makeblock has in its programming library in the blocks area. Okay, so it's very helpful to have your students and to encourage your learners to look through the blocks that are there and make predictions about what they think those blocks are going to do and how those blocks are going to work. And then the lesson plan has one more question, which has your students explain how positive and negative numbers impact the outcomes of the effects in makeblock. And this is just to ensure that your students understand what they're typing in and what they're dragging to the script area, and that they're not just copying your example on the board or the example that are in the PowerPoint slides. So as a reminder, we learned that you can save your files to your computer by going to File, Save to your computer while you are in MBlock. However, on Tuesday's lesson, we discussed creating an account in the MBlock community where you can then save your files in the cloud, and they can be in your they can be stored in your profile, and then you can share them with the community if you would like. I will show you that at the end. Again, for those of you who were not able to do that yet, I'll show you how you can join the community and add your files when we finish working with our example in this lesson today. So as with every lesson in this curriculum, for those of you that are new, the lessons are structured with a warm-up, a hands-on portion of the lesson that is guided practice. The teacher or the parent is usually working with the student through that portion. And then there is a try it section of the curriculum that is an independent practice where the learner is working on a project on their own and applying what they learned in the lesson. And then the lesson concludes with a wrap up. And the wrap up portion of the lesson has different assessment strategies depending on the length of the lesson. So if the lesson has time for a share out, that will be included. Sometimes it's recapping what was covered in the warm up. So I want to review the independent practice activity, especially since there's actually something that the students learn while they are working on their independent practice. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint slides. And this is the independent practice assignment that students would see on their end. It talks to them about making their showcase for Panda to showcase at the upcoming Welcome to Earth party. Okay, and so their program needs to include an appropriate background. Remember, we learned that in the last lesson. They need to include 3 transformation effects, most likely the 3 that they wrote down in the warm-up. They need to trigger the transformations using the up, down, left, right, W, A, S, and D keys on the keyboard. And they need to trigger a reset of the effects and the size using the space key. Now, in the lesson plan talks about the significance of the W, A, S, and D keys. So if you are if you enjoy playing video games, especially video games where there are more than 4 keyboard controls, or when it's a two-person, multiplayer or two-person video game, typically a computer video game will have the up, down, left, and right keys for one player, and then the WASD keys are commonly used for the second player or for left-hand arrow controls, left-hand controls. So by having the WASD keys incorporated into this lesson, that is a programming concept when you are making video games that are multiplayer or have left and right hand controls. So it's just a way to infuse some of that game design into the lesson as well and get students familiar with using the WASD keys. Now, these lesson plans continue with extension activities for the independent practice, and these extension challenges are for students that get done early or may need more work, or they just absolutely love programming in MBlock. These are great things to challenge them to do. And so one of the challenges for this lesson is to trigger multiple transformations with the same event. So when the W key is pressed, 2 or 3 transformations are taking place at the same time instead of just one. And then add say blocks. We used the say blocks on our last lesson. So add say blocks to the program to program Panda to say something during the showcase. So the example program we looked at the beginning of the lesson that we looked at had Panda announce what transformation Panda was completing. And so with this lesson, they can, as their extension, have Panda say something before starting the entire showcase, or Panda can say something when each key is pressed during the showcase. So that's just a way to extend and add some added challenges to the lesson. So When you have completed your challenge, we encourage you to work through the independent practice activities as though you're a student. We encourage you to do that while you're going through these lessons because it will help you when you experience the lessons as a learner would. You start to troubleshoot and see where some of your learners may have some difficulty. And when you do that, we are making it available for you to share your work in the STEAM Onboard community studio. So I'm going to head back over to the browser and we can, I want to show you the MBlock website, which I have. When you are on the MBlock website, which is just mblock.cc, there is a community link across the top bar. And when you are on the community page, you can create an account in the top right corner. I am already logged in. If you need instructions to create an account, you can look back at the last video. And once you are logged in, you can save your files in the cloud. So I can click on my profile. I have 5 projects saved in the cloud. And so I'm going to save this project I was just working on in the cloud so that you can see it. So I'm going to hit the save across the top. And it's going to save this file into my account online. And once you have saved a file in your account, I'm going to refresh my page, it will appear in your online account. I did not title this, I should have. And then you can share it out publicly. So you can see which files you have shared and which files are not shared. When you have a file that is shared, you can copy the URL. You can copy the URL. And on the community homepage, if you scroll down, there is a makeblock STEAM Onboard studio. And you can add your project to the studio. So it looks like a few people have done on Tuesday's assignment and put it in here. And you just paste the link in and you contribute your project to the studio. This project's actually for the next lesson, so I'm not going to put in there just yet. But you can paste it in and your project will appear in our studio. This is a great way for us to share virtually because we're not seeing each other face to face in a classroom. So as instructors and as parents, as we're working through these lessons and these webinars, we can share our work out that way. The lesson plan does encourage, this lesson plan encourages you to have a peer feedback, peer review after this assignment as well. This lesson, this peer feedback activity is actually very similar to the one on Tuesday. Now remember, peer feedback is going to allow them to get comfortable with having constructive conversations about the work that they're doing. And it may seem that we are frequently incorporating peer feedback into the lessons, but it's because when working with learners and working with students of all ages, it's very important to model and practice what this looks like so that they can improve their skill of talking about what they found interesting about the project and what they would recommend for improving about the project, because we want students to be able to think critically while looking at each other's work. I've seen in times past when we've taught programs like MBlock with students, they'll be like, oh, that's really cool. But then when they look at the code, they aren't really understanding like what they found interesting about it. They're just like, oh, that's really cool. So we want students to be able to begin to use vocabulary, begin to point out specifics. When you are doing these peer feedback activities in your classroom, maybe you want students to focus on one specific thing. So maybe you say, okay, when we do this peer feedback this time, I want you to only talk about the events that were used in this project. What do you think about the events? Did they choose the best? What was good? What could be improved, etc. So you can make specific topics of conversation. Maybe you want them to focus on, when you do this activity, to focus on just the looks transformations. Did you find that they chose good transformations? Okay, so you can narrow it down in that way as well. So I want to review our questions at the end of our lesson. Every lesson has some review questions. And if you're able to, in the Q&A box, you can throw your answer in there. But which of the following options is not an event block? Which of the following options is not an events block? I'm seeing some answers for D, and that is correct. You will notice that almost all events have this shape. There's nothing that can be attached to the top of an event that happens before an event, because the event, as we saw earlier, is the start. It's what starts the subsequent actions. And so nothing can go and attach on top of the events block. So you'll see that rounded shape at the top of your events blocks. Okay? Which of the following blocks can make a sprite look like the figure in the picture? So which effect or transformation makes a sprite appear as though the example in the picture? I'm seeing some examples. Some answers, I'm sorry. I'm seeing B is coming through a lot. That is an example of the whirl effect. It's the whirl effect. It basically takes the sprite and kind of spins it upon itself. If you haven't mastered those, that's completely fine. Many of you probably saw them for the first time today, so that's okay. But go back and look at that example program that came with lesson 3. And then our last question: which of the following blocks can make a sprite return to its original appearance? So I'm seeing a lot of answers D, which is correct. D clears the graphic effects of our sprite. Perfect. Great job. So that is lesson 3. I did want to just make sure, when we were looking at that last question, it's very important that students get into the habit of resetting and clearing graphic effects, because we will see that clearing and resetting in block is going to be essential as we move into future lessons, not just when working with looks, but also when working with positioning or movement and things like that. So this idea of the program or a sprite only does exactly what we tell it to do. So it won't do more than what we tell it to do. So we need to make sure that when we as programmers are programming our sprites and our program in block, that we're thinking critically about what specifically we want our programs to do. So we are going to continue next week into lesson 4, and lesson 4 is when we begin to animate. We're going to begin to use costumes to make our sprites look like they're animating. So in the example in our lesson on Tuesday, lesson 4, we will be having Panda walk. So that's pretty cool. We're going to make Panda look like Panda's legs are moving back and forth. So again, our schedule is on the makeblock website. When you are on the Steam on Board website, our schedule is there. We are meeting on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sorry. Mm-hmm. And I'll let Christy go over that with you. But we're meeting next Tuesday at 10 a.m.
Yep. We'll be meeting Tuesday. It will be our 4th lesson of 8. We hope to see you all there. And as a follow-up to this, you will receive a link to the lesson where you can download the resources. You'll also receive a link to our YouTube channel where you can view this once we've posted it. And you will receive reminders for next week's lesson. So just a reminder on Monday, and hopefully we'll see